Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. Well, my friends, they did it. This shouldn't even be notable. This shouldn't be newsworthy. This shouldn't be a story. But 35 Republicans joined Democrats in the House of Representatives to vote to pass a bill that would set up this bipartisan 9/11 style commission to investigate the Donald Trump January 6th insurrection riot. And it is incredible that it is only 35 members from the Republican Party that joined. 176 Republicans, 175, 175 Republicans. The vote was 252 to 175, saying we don't want to know what happened. And we don't want all of these remaining questions answered in terms of the motivations and the genesis and the explanation of why did it take so long to get a bolstered police presence and the military, all of these different things that should be investigated. They don't want to know. Or they believe that it would point back to them in some way. This is the greatest motivation for these Republicans not wanting this investigation, which is that many of them know that it would not look good for them. But we will get back to that. Axios is reporting, as I told you yesterday, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy opposed this commission. And it looked like there would be between 20 and 50 Republicans who would vote in favor of it, and 35 did. This makes it more difficult for Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell to just dismiss it all as partisan, because you did have 35 Republicans in the House who were in favor of it. Now, as I told you yesterday, the setup is really as bipartisan as you can get. Democrats control the House, yes. So there was going to be some more control that Democrats have rather than Republicans over the commission. But it would be a 10-member commission, 5 members selected by Democrats, 5 members selected by Republicans. The chair would be a Democrat because Democrats control the House, and the vice chair would be a Republican. And if they are going to issue subpoenas, which presumably they would, every subpoena has to be signed off on by the chair and the vice chair. So there are Republicans. I mean, listen, if I'm Kevin McCarthy and I realize that I was on the phone with Trump on the day of the insurrection and the content of that conversation may be of interest to the committee and I might be subpoenaed, that is going to be something that would require both the Democratic chair and the Republican vice chair. And indeed, there seems to be at least somewhat of an appetite from Republicans to figure out what happened. And so if you're Kevin McCarthy and you're thinking, I might have to testify here, or at least documents related to my conversation with Trump might be part of this, it makes sense you would try to make this go away. So the next step here, now that the House has passed it, the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, has said the bill will get a vote. It's not clear whether any Republicans in the Senate are going to get on board. 2 days ago, Mitch McConnell said he can't support it in its then current form. 2 sources say that it's conceivable that Mitch McConnell will have to change his tune because of these 35 Republicans who voted in favor of it. 10 Republican senators would be necessary for this to pass. You cannot pass this in the Senate with 50 plus Kamala Harris as the tie-breaking vote. That would be the budget reconciliation process. It cannot be used here. So in order for this commission to happen, for it to be voted through in the Senate, you will need all 50 Democrats and 10 Republicans, or 49 Democrats and 11 Republicans, or you can do the math, any combination that gets you to 60. This could have started months ago. There was no interest before Joe Biden was president. There was not even the possibility before Joe Biden was president because Democrats didn't control the Senate. And now hopefully we are getting closer to that. It could have been done a long time ago. It really could. And it's because of Republicans and Republicans only that it has not yet happened. So we're going to follow it. And there are any number of different reasons why different Republicans would want this not to take place. But I would say I am more confident than I've been in the last 2 weeks today that ultimately this is going to happen. And let's now look at some of the I don't even really want to call them reasons because they barely even have anything to do with the actual commission and the riots. But let's look at some of the words that came out of the mouths of Republicans during yesterday's debate about this on the floor of the House. Okay, so to reset, fortunately, the bill to establish a commission to investigate the riots of January 6th, known colloquially as the Trump riots, passed the House of Representatives yesterday with the vote of Democrats and 35 Republicans. But the path to that vote was very circuitous, and it included a bunch of completely unhinged and off-topic rants and raves from a variety of Republican members of the House, starting with Trumpian radical Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of I Harass AOC for a Living fame. Now, if there is anyone who is incentivized not to have January 6th investigated, it would be Marjorie Taylor Greene, because she is likely a perpetrator, both in ginning people up to want to riot by telling lies about the election for months starting in November of 2020, and also because she had close associates rioting. A guy who called her a great friend and who worked with her on other, quote, issues, participated in the riots. So here is Marjorie Taylor Greene. Listen to this.
As a person that was a victim of the January 6th Capitol attack, I can tell you I'm against the violence that happened that day, but I do not believe a January 6th commission will achieve any resolution because we have already had our Department of Justice arrest 445 people with 100 more to be arrested soon. There's also reports of people being held for 23 hours in solitary confinement. That should not be happening. These people haven't even had a court date yet. You see, what's going to happen with the January 6th commission is the media is going to use this to smear Trump supporters and President Trump for the next few years and cover up the damage, the real damage that's happening to the people of this country, which is tearing down our economy, ripping our borders wide open, and hurting this country.
The real damage of the riots was done by Trump supporters. She's acting like it would be unfair, like it wouldn't make sense for the investigation to end up making Trump supporters look bad. The rioters were all Trump supporters. She says, listen, 400 people have already been arrested. 100 more people are going to be arrested. This entire thing is going to be misused to make Trump supporters look bad. Well, the 500 people you just mentioned are Trump supporters. These are sort of the facts, Marjorie. And the facts may lead us to say, hey, hundreds of these Trump supporters were really bad people, or at least they made bad decisions on that day. Then Madison Cawthorn, another Trumpian lunatic, comes to the microphone and says, this entire investigative commission thing, it's all bogus because my constituents in South Carolina, mind you, not a border state, care mostly about the border. Here is Madison Cawthorn.
Mr. Speaker, according to recent data from my district, the number one concern of my constituents is the Biden border crisis. Let me repeat that. The number one concern of my constituents in North Carolina is the crisis at our southern border over 1,600 miles away.
So there's a lot to talk about there. First, if it's true that his South Carolinian constituents care mostly about the border and not about the riots, it's partially because he and his fellow Republicans and Fox News and Newsmax have convinced people that there is a crisis at the border, when in reality, very little has changed from when Donald Trump was president. And in fact, we now have relatively few kids at the border. Second, whether there is or is not a crisis at the border, and no matter how it ranks for his South Carolinian constituents, you can deal with whatever's going on at the border and have a commission investigate January 6th. Both things can be done. It's not we shouldn't do this because in South Carolina, in my district, people care about the border. You could do both. Then Republican Congressman Dan Bishop goes into the semantics game where he says this was a riot, it was a mob, but an insurrection. No, no, no.
It was about insurrection. Let me just say this. If it was an insurrection, it was the worst example of an insurrection in the history of mankind. It was a riot. It was a mob. And it was significant. And it was troublesome. But this is not bipartisanship. And I fear that the gentleman from New York may find that he has been played.
Now, this one keeps being repeated. It wasn't really an insurrection because they didn't succeed. First of all, you can still investigate what happened, whether or not you define it as an insurrection or an insurrection attempt. The failures of leadership, the failures of law enforcement, potentially by design of those around Donald Trump, you can investigate all of that stuff, and it's worthy of investigation whether or not you deem it an insurrection. But remember, just because it didn't succeed doesn't mean it wasn't an insurrection. If you try to bribe someone and they refuse the bribe, you're still able to be charged for bribing someone. So that is just a terrible semantic game that they are playing, and many of them are playing it. Speaking of semantic games, then Republican Congressman Louis Gohmert spoke. Remember, this guy is a former judge, if you can believe that. And I actually don't even know what he's talking about, which is really common with Louis Gohmert. See, I challenge you to figure out what he's talking about.
Look, things have changed a lot since the 9/11 Commission, because back then we did not have a problem on both sides, either side of the aisle, condemning anti-Semitic remarks. Now, one side has a problem doing that. Back then, we didn't have, we had never in the history of Congress had one party commit what is arguably a felony up to 20 years in prison by preventing an ongoing session of Congress, the exact charge, 1512, 18 U.S.C., that is being alleged against people that came in. As a judge, I would have no problem sentencing anybody that broke into the Capitol, anything that committed a crime here. But let's be real, the partisanship has been dramatic. And that's why it's different now than the 9/11 Commission. Let's get back to being bipartisan and not use every tool as a partisan stick to beat Republicans with.
I really want to know what on earth Louis Gohmert is talking about. I just don't understand it. And that's really common with Louis Gohmert, where it's not that you hear one of his arguments and you say, oh, here are the 3 reasons why the argument makes no sense. I just don't even know what he's saying. I don't know what he's talking about. And then lastly, from Republicans for today, new Republican Conference Chair Elise Stefanik, who, remember, recently replaced the canceled Liz Cheney. She somehow ends up talking about Joe Biden destroying the economy in the last 4 months, even though the topic of debate is supposed to be the riots, not the economy, and not Joe Biden.
Thank you. Americans across this country are facing crisis after crisis. Just think, in just over a year ago, in early 2020, our economy was booming, our standing in the world was strong, we had just rebuilt our nation's military, and our communities and families were thriving. Here we are, a little over 1 year later, in just over 100 days, President Biden and Speaker Pelosi have dismantled that foundation, and the American people are paying the price. Americans are suffering.
All lies. I mean, just all provable, demonstrable lies. The military wasn't rebuilt by Trump because it was fine when Donald Trump took over. Trump tells that story of the generals came to me. They said, sir, we're out of bullets. All made up. The military was fine. We were seen as a joke around the world for electing Trump. We are now recovering our reputation globally. But again, none of it has anything to do with the insurrectious riots. And then lastly, overall, making a lot of sense, our friend, Congressman Tim Ryan, Democratic congressman from Ohio, has been a guest on this program. Really good guy. He just had enough of the nonsense and he made that clear.
I want to thank the gentleman from New York and the other Republicans who are supporting this and thank them for their bipartisanship. To the other 90% of our friends on the other side of the aisle, holy cow, incoherence. No idea what you're talking about. Benghazi, you guys chased the former Secretary of State all over the country, spent millions of dollars. We have people scaling the Capitol, hitting the Capitol Police with lead pipes across the head, and we can't get bipartisanship. What else has to happen in this country? Cops. This is a slap in the face to every rank and file cop in the United States. If we're going to take on China, if we're going to rebuild the country, if we're going to reverse climate change, we need 2 political parties in this country that are both living in reality, and you ain't one of them. I yield back the balance.
So listen, at the end of the day, Republicans did what we expected them to do. And they are incentivized to try to shut this thing down, because what the Riot Commission might uncover is that they themselves are very much to blame what took place on January 6th. And then at the end of the day, they did pass the bill to start this commission. We will now see what happens in the Senate. Let me know what you think about what is the fundamental reason that Republicans don't want the commission. Is it because they think it will make them look bad? Is it because it will incriminate them? Something else? All of the above? Let me know your thoughts. And remember that if you have been thinking of becoming a David Pakman Show member, Monday, Memorial Day, it's going to be a perfect day. I can feel it. The weather will just be beautiful. We are doing a one-day membership special. We are looking to drop a massive bomb of new memberships, and we are going to offer them at a huge discount. If you want to be notified about how to take advantage of that discount, just get on my newsletter at davidpakman.com. Quick break. Really great program today. We might keep this one. What if you could read 10 books in just one sitting? That's exactly what one of my favorite apps lets you do. It's called Blinkist, and what they do is take thousands of popular nonfiction books. They condense them down into text or audio that you can consume in 15 minutes. Blinkist makes sure that you're getting all of the important core insights from each book. So it's perfect for exploring a book you otherwise wouldn't have time for. If there's a full book you're thinking about buying, you can use Blinkist to get a sample first. Just think how much you can enrich yourself by being able to soak up an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month, and you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video. There is no need to wait. Today is a great day to get yourself a David Pakman Show membership, the #1 funding source for our show. Sign up at joinpakman.com. Also want to invite you to participate in the David Pakman Show subreddit discussions. You can find that at davidpakman.com/Reddit. More than 30,000 of our viewers and listeners have already subscribed. A couple of posts I want to briefly discuss that I spotted on the subreddit this morning. One user said, "Backlash to new mask recommendations show why the left are bad at politics," arguing the CDC changed mask guidelines to say you can wear them indoors. And there has been surprisingly a lot of backlash to this from our own side. Let me be straight. This is a huge political win for Joe Biden. His agenda is back to normal. And the quicker we get back to normal, the better he looks. And in terms Dems and the left as a whole, if he were a Republican president, every single Republican would be shouting through the rooftops of the success of this and how we are basically out of the pandemic. Instead, our own side seems to be actively hampering our political agenda by questioning the science of the decision, and some cities and states are keeping mask mandates in effect regardless of the science. So I think that this is a really, really good point. And I'm going to do a commentary later where I'm going to talk about the mask forever stuff. I won't preempt that because I'm going to get into it. I think this is a really astute commentary, which is some of the reaction when the CDC said vaccinated people don't really have to wear masks anywhere because the vaccines are so effective and the spread is cut so dramatically and the risk is just so low. A better reaction would be, it's incredible how quickly Joe Biden got us to this point. The left could have united and made this unilaterally a win for Joe Biden. Look, Biden did COVID stimulus and he asked people to wear masks for 100 days and all this different stuff and vaccination. And now look at what the CDC is able to say. Unfortunately, I think that some on the left misplayed it by saying this is crazy, even though we've been following the CDC all along. We're going to keep mask mandates. We're going to do all this different stuff. That frames it as not the win that it really should be considered. And this is a separate question from whether individuals could, should, or might choose to keep wearing masks personally, which I think is perfectly fine and I'm going to address later. I think that's a very astute commentary about a missed opportunity by the left. Excellent post. Also, a number of posts, including this one, about Joe Rogan's comments that, quote, straight white men are being silenced by, quote, woke culture. I did a big rant about this yesterday during a live stream where I talked about the predecessors to so-called woke culture, which is not a term I use, but it's sort of a follow-on of Michel Foucault's postmodernist analysis of literature, which has turned into critical theory and a bunch of other things which lead us to every narrative has to be equally valued, when I really don't think that that's a good idea. And there are some extremes, which maybe Joe Rogan is alluding to, but big picture, Joe Rogan's comments about woke culture and people aren't going to be able to go outside anymore because in the past some have been imprisoned and straight white men won't be able to speak. It goes cartoonishly too far. I ranted about it for almost 15 minutes yesterday on a live stream. We might pull that and make it a standalone clip. But I do think that Joe Rogan goes too far here in his comments. And I think most of my audience tends to agree with that. But join the discussion yourself on the subreddit by going to davidpakman.com/REDDIT. It's free. I'm selling you nothing other than a free good time. Okay? Check it out. I've been ignoring this new blog of Donald Trump's for many weeks because he's posting daily trash to it of no meaning, significance, and often even related to topics that are not remotely newsworthy. It's basically the last gasps for attention from a guy who is really desperate for attention, but banned from many social media platforms. But yesterday I came to you and I said, sirs, in my audience, the civil investigation into the Trump Organization being undertaken by the AG of New York, Letitia James, has now become a criminal investigation. That was the news yesterday, a major change. There are now multiple criminal investigations going on into Donald Trump's organization, one being done by Manhattan DA Cy Vance Jr., the other by New York AG Letitia James. And my instinct yesterday was Trump's going to go nuts. Trump's going to go absolutely unhinged as a result of this. So I went over to donaldjtrump.com/desk, which is his blog, and Trump put out almost like a full page of breathless run-on sentences attacking everyone. Half the post is in scare quotes, and you have to see it to believe it. I'm going to try to read some of it, but I can't do all of it because I'm going to run out of breath. Okay, so here is some of what Trump wrote in reaction to now being under two criminal probes. Here we go. Buckle up. I have just learned through leaks in the mainstream media that after being under investigation from the time I came down the escalator 5.5 years ago, including the fake Russia hoax, the 2-year, $48 million no collusion Mueller witch hunt impeachment hoax number 1, impeachment hoax number 2, and others, that the Democrat New York Attorney General has informed my organization that their investigation is no longer just a civil matter, but also potentially a criminal investigation working with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. That's one sentence, my friends, okay? Trump goes on to say, there is nothing more corrupt than an investigation that is in desperate search of a crime. But make no mistake, that is exactly what is happening here. The Attorney General of New York literally campaigned on prosecuting Donald Trump even before she knew anything about me. She said that if elected, she would use her office to look into every aspect of my real estate dealings. She swore that she would definitely sue me. She boasted on video that she would be, and I quote, a real pain in the ass. She declared, just wait until I'm in the Attorney General's office and I've got my eyes on Trump Tower. She also promised that if elected, she would join with law enforcement and other attorney generals. Ooh, it should be attorneys general across this nation in removing this president from office. And it's important that everyone understand that the days of Donald Trump are coming to an end. The Attorney General made each of these statements not after having had an opportunity to actually look at the facts, but before she was even elected, before she had even seen a shred of evidence. This is something that happens in failed third world countries, but not the United States. If you can run for a prosecutor's office pledging to take out your enemies and be elected to that job by partisan voters who wish to enact political retribution, then we are no longer a free constitutional democracy. Likewise, the district attorney's office has been going after me for years based on a lying, discredited lowlife who was not listened to or given credibility by other prosecutorial offices and sentenced to 3 years in prison for lying and other events unrelated to me. These investigations have also been going on for years, with members and associates of the Trump Organization being viciously attacked, harassed, and threatened in order to say anything bad about the 45th president of the United States. This would include having to make up false stories. Numerous documents, all prepared by large and prestigious law and accounting firms, have been examined, and many hours of testimony have been taken from many people, some of whom I have not seen in years. All right. There's like pages and pages and pages. And it ends with, if these prosecutors focused on real issues, crime would be obliterated and New York would be great and free again. Extraordinarily triggered. I mean, just completely and totally off the rails. And just imagine what will happen if Donald Trump, or more likely associates or whatever, were to be charged. It would be completely off the rails. And I don't know how scared Trump personally is, but there are a lot of people around Donald Trump that are very, very scared right now because of now 2 criminal investigations into the Trump organization. And so I don't know how much more we're going to continue hearing from Donald Trump. We spoke already about how Rudy Giuliani has the walls closing in around him as well. And Trump seems to have made the decision that he wants to head for the hills and have nothing to do with defending Rudy or speaking out or helping Rudy raise money or any of it, which he has been asked to do repeatedly. So it's certainly possible that the fear is actually starting to reach Donald Trump at this point in time. At the same time, the counterbalance to that is that people, we've said this before, people as narcissistic as Donald Trump tend to think nobody can touch me. And that is something which may keep Trump in a sort of fantasy world where he's not worried at all. Now, for his sake, it's probably not going to ever lead to charges against Donald Trump, as I've said before, and it's certainly not going to lead to prison time. So maybe Trump isn't crazy not to be afraid if he's not afraid. But triggered he is, and I would only expect as these investigations build, and if Rudy Giuliani is charged, this guy is going to absolutely explode, the likes of which we have probably not yet seen. We'll have more on this, including Donald Trump's multi-page single paragraph rant. It's 1 paragraph, but it's many pages on his blog on the David Pakman Show Instagram, which you can find at David Pakman Show on Instagram, at David Pakman Show on Instagram. You can also find me on Instagram, not as good as the David Pakman Show account. I try, but I'm not nearly as good at posting. David.Pakman, you can find me on Instagram. We are going to speak to Bill Scher after this brief break, and then I will do my mask rant a little bit later on in the show. The David Pakman Show depends on your support, and the easiest way is through membership, which includes the world-famous bonus show, as well as commercial-free audio and video streams of the show just for members. Sign up today at joinpakman.com. Coupon code saves you 40%, BETTER21. Today, we are going to be speaking to Bill Scher, certainly a familiar face on the show, although in a literal sense, the current hairstyle and beard makes him look a little bit different than normal. Bill Scher is a contributor to the Washington Monthly, Politico Magazine, and Real Clear Politics, and also hosts the history podcast, When America Worked. Bill, always great to have you on.
Do I still hold the record for most David Pakman Show appearances, or have I lost that?
I think so. There was a period where Richard Wolff surpassed you, but you've taken it back now, I think, which is good, Okay, so we've got the 1-6 commission moving forward, but that's not a Biden proposal. Joe Biden has talked about, he has this tax reform plan, he has a jobs plan, he has an infrastructure plan. There are different ideas for how different of elements would be paid for and disagreements as to the size of packages and all of these different things. If you just look at the rest of this year, do any of those things get done? Which is the most likely? Which is the likely to benefit Biden the most politically?
Well, I think Biden has made clear inaction is not an option in terms of infrastructure.
Okay.
I don't think he can go back to the voters in 2022 and said, sorry, I got bupkis, but I fought really hard. Mm-hmm. He needs something. And what's interesting is what's happening with the 1-6 commission, which seems very bitter, partisan, fractious. Yes, you got 35 House Republicans that came over, but McCarthy was against it. McConnell came out against it. It seems like it's same old, moving farther and farther apart. While that's happening, Biden continues to meet with Republican leaders on infrastructure.
Right.
And Mitch McConnell, of all people, says I think we can do 600, 800 billion dollars. Now, Democrats aren't necessarily over the moon about that, but it's hardly the same as I want to make Joe Biden a one-term president. I'm not going to give him anything for anything. There is some, and I understand people can be mistrustful and cynical about McConnell's motives here. I'm not arguing that McConnell is a saint or doing something out of the goodness of his heart. But clearly there is something there that he does not want to be seen as obstructionist on infrastructure. There is a worry on the Republicans' part. And the question is, can Biden exploit that to get a bill with 60 votes, which he may need to get if he cannot get 50 for a partisan reconciliation bill on infrastructure?
Well, now, so I guess I've been thinking about whether the fear of appearing obstructionist is warranted, because, I mean, just to think a little bit about the 1.9 trillion COVID stimulus under Biden, where people got the $1,400. There were two discussions when that was going on. One, will the Democrats suffer if they pass this without Republican support? I think the answer is clearly no. People got their $1,400 and they're pleased with that. And some even believe that Republicans actually had a role to play. We just looked at a bunch of polling. Many of the people who got the $1,400 don't know that they got it only because of Democrats. The other side of that was, will Republicans suffer in any way for having not participated at all in a COVID stimulus bill that was quite popular with the American people? It seems the answer there is also sort of no, at least as far as I can tell right now. So what I'm kind of getting to is, if Democrats just keep doing stuff on their own when they can, and the things that require 60 votes, obviously, though, they can't do that. Is there really going to be any consequence for anybody for Democrats just doing stuff on their own?
What's an unknown here is inflation. We don't know what the economy is going to look like 6 months from now, 1 month from now, 1 year from now. We have these. We have an inflationary spike in the past month, but which the Biden people say is temporary. The Fed thinks it's temporary. The Fed thinks it can manage it. It's not going to go off the rails.
Well, remember, I mean, it wasn't from March to April. It was April 21 compared to April 20, where there was a complete demand collapse. Everything was cheaper than ever. I mean, I think it's quite possible that it's an artifact, really.
Well, there's also a month-to-month inflation increase too.
That one I haven't seen.
The bigger spike is year to year.
Okay.
But there is a March to April also.
I hadn't seen that.
But again, it could just be the weirdness of coming out of a pandemic that will correct itself.
Yep.
Or not. So I think both parties are kind of waiting and watching to see who's going to get the better of that argument down the road. But having said that, you're not seeing Republicans say we should not have any infrastructure bill because we're in the midst of inflation and that would just make things worse.
Yeah.
Because that's a long-term bill. That's for 8 to 10 years. It's not about today. And there are Republicans that still want to bring home some bacon to their own states and districts. So, and on top of that, I think, I can't say it for as a fact, I think McConnell wants to be able to say he did something. He would like to obstruct a lot of other things, but wants to be able to say, hey, look, I'm a reasonable guy. I met them halfway on physical traditional infrastructure, and that gives me the credibility to block him on all these other things. They are talking. What the two parties are saying on infrastructure have overlap. The red lines that are being drawn do not negate the possibility of a compromise. And again, Biden can't come up with nothing. No, Joe Manchin could say, okay, forget the Republicans. They're not being reasonable here. We tried. You gave it your best shot. I'll go with you on reconciliation right now. Mm-hmm. He is not there yet. And we don't know if he's ever going to get there. So you may be right in saying, hey, Democrats can do this politically without repercussion. That's only true if 50 Senate Democrats agree to do that.
Yeah.
If Manchin doesn't agree or Kirsten Sinema doesn't agree or what have you, then you just can't do it. And I think as long as Republicans are putting semi-reasonable proposals on the table, I don't think a Joe Manchin pulls the plug on the process, and that might require you to do that kind of deal.
One of the changes in the Republican Party, certainly during the Trump era, but in particular in the last 4 months, is that while, okay, Mitch McConnell is going to meetings and a few Republicans are going to meetings to talk about things, the Republican Party is not really a party of policy at this point in time. Some members of the House just straight up say it. I mean, Madison Cawthorn's office has said, we're not running a policy office, we're running a communications office, and we're doing tweets and we're doing memes and we're doing, talking about guns on the House floor, on his wheelchair, and all of this different stuff. At some point, will that implode, or can that be viable when Republican voters don't seem to mind the idea of just getting in the way of Democrats and not really doing anything?
Well, this is what both the Democratic and Republican negotiators have to consider. I mean, you look at the majority of the Republican Party, you look at polls, you look at the House caucus, you'd say this is a party still obsessed with Trump, cult of personality, not interested in real legislating or governing, just want to fight culture war battles and exploit grievances. And how can you work with that? But here you got Liz Cheney making the minority point within the Republican Party. We have to get back to being a party of substance and policy. We can't sustain as a cult of personality party. I'm not quoting her verbatim here, but I think that's the gist of what she's saying.
Well, yeah, but also, I mean, I have to say, she voted with Trump like 93% of the time. The policy she wants to get back to, I don't know. I'm not sure that she's really that different.
Well, no, Liz Cheney wants to get back to hawkish foreign policy.
Yeah.
She wants the Republican Party to be a neocon party again.
Yeah, true.
That's her.
Okay.
Now, do you have in the Senate enough Republicans who take a longer view, say, look, we can't survive as a cult of personality party. That may be fine if you want to hold on to 200 House seats. But if you actually want to be a majority again, if you want to get the presidency again, you want to have a Senate that functions again, that we have the upper hand with, we have to look beyond the immediate passions of our base. And we have to show that we can do it and survive doing it. This is an opportunity for the Romneys and the Portmans and the Capitos and perhaps the McConnells to say, we can still do this, bring home stuff for our states and our districts, and people will respect us for it. And if that sentiment is there, can Biden, can Schumer, can Manchin, can they draw that out and come up? I mean, the bill that presumably can get done is $800 billion traditional infrastructure without raising taxes on corporations, or not a lot on corporations. Some bitter pills for Democrats to swallow in that, but still something that Biden could go back to the public and say, I did this. Tangible stuff that we did, delivered for you, reward us in 2022 and 2024 for it. There is a potential for common ground there if both parties see short-term / long-term incentive for their own parties.
There is, I believe, no chance that the capital gains rate gets increased the way Joe Biden has signaled he would want to do. I think it's just one of those things that in the end isn't going to happen. It seems very exciting to a lot of people. I think there's a very interesting budget calculation in terms of what it would do. It would be significant. I see that as an example of something that is destined to die, and it's not happening. Am I being unrealistic in my analysis of that piece?
Not necessarily. And look, let me try to tie a few threads together, if I may.
Yes.
So Biden has two big tax proposals connected to the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan.
Right.
The American Jobs Plan, which is mostly traditional infrastructure, but gets a little non-traditional long-term care, school construction, things that Republicans don't count as traditional. That's tied to the corporate tax increases. Joe Manchin has said, I don't want to go as far as you do, Joe Biden. I'll meet you halfway there. So you already have some indication that Biden doesn't have 50 Democrats for his proposal as is. Republicans say, we don't want to touch the Trump tax cut at all.
Right.
We want to increase user fees, maybe increase the gas tax, maybe create a new vehicle mileage tax, which would hit electric cars and hybrid cars more.
We don't want that.
What's that?
I don't want that.
Well, it's not crazy. I mean, we have functioned on a user pays principle for highways, for over 50 years. It's not a new idea the Republicans have. The only newness is extending it to hybrid electric cars.
Right.
So again, if you're Joe Biden and getting a bill is first and foremost, and you can't get 50 for your ideal tax plan, that makes the Republican plan more relevant in the discussion. So Biden may say, you know what, I don't need to do the corporate tax hike here. Now, so let me add one other element here. What's the other big thing that Biden really needs? He needs to extend that child tax credit expansion.
Right.
That is a signature policy achievement. The monthly checks are going to start coming in July, but they expire after December. If they run out, you've not only lost your signature policy achievement, people are going to be mad. Hey, you gave me these checks and now you cut me off. And this might have to get decided during an inflationary spike, where people might say, hey, Biden, you put too much money in the system. You're overheating the economy. The only way you can argue you're not going to overheat is with a pay for, by not having to be deficit spending, but having those checks be offset with other tax revenue, which some Democrats like Angus King, who's independent but caucus with Democrats, have already said, I want that paid for. You're not going to get so child tax credit expansion, $100 billion a year. The corporate tax hike plan of Biden's is $166 billion a year. And the taxes in the American Families Plan, which are on wealthy individuals, that's another $100 billion a year.
Right.
There's only so many pots of money here. So if you need $100 billion a year to cover the child tax credit expansion to extend it beyond 2021, that's probably going to be a reconciliation bill. You're probably not going to get Republicans to come along and help save your partisan policy achievement. So save your partisan tax proposal for that and work with Republicans on something that's not as partisan for the infrastructure bill. I think that's where the stars are most likely to align.
The thing I really continue not to understand about the corporate tax rate discussion, and maybe this is by design and this is exactly the theater that they want, the corporate tax rate being 21, 28, or 35, it has a far smaller impact than a lot of people believe. First of all, because it doesn't apply to sole proprietorships. It doesn't apply to LLCs. It doesn't apply to S corporations, all of which are taxed as pass-through entities at the personal income tax rate. So then you've got just the bucket of C corporations and a few other specific entities that are subject to the corporate tax rate. But many of them are paying 0 or 9 or 11 or 7% anyway because of the extensive deductions and a lack of a corporate alternative minimum tax. So I feel like it's a sort of insane asylum discussion about Manchin thinks this and it was 35 and 28 when it's not really the way that you capture tax revenue from C corporations anyway, unless you deal with the other stuff. Are both sides just agreeing to pretend that's not an issue?
Well, that's why it's relatively easy for Biden to say, okay, Joe Manchin, I'll come down to 28 to 25 on the corporate income tax rate, because the bigger issue are the loopholes.
Right.
I don't want to make sure they can't escape paying the rate at all. But that's going to be a very hard thing to negotiate. I think you can negotiate with Joe Manchin. There's probably some middle ground there with the Joe Manchin. It may not be exactly what Biden has right now, but you can get something from him. Much, much harder to get that with Republicans.
Yeah.
So why try? Why kill yourself to get 60 votes on the corporate tax reform, which would probably be very, very difficult and be very, very watered down, when you need some big money for the child tax credit expansion? So that's why I think, again, I can't promise this is what's going to happen. Maybe they go full partisan across the board.
Right.
Maybe they shoot the moon completely because Republicans are too obstructionist. I can't negate that possibility. But so long as Republicans are in the game, and so long as Manchin's keeping them in the game, I think you got to keep in mind that you got to have a pay for in your back pocket by the end of the year, especially if inflation is spiking, and you got to show that you're paying for your checks.
A lot to look forward to, I think, is the point. And certainly as we get into 2022, things that, the child tax credit may play significantly in the 2022 midterm. So these are not merely academic discussions, I think is fair to say. We've been speaking with Bill Scher, contributor to the Washington Monthly, Politico Magazine, and Real Clear Politics, and of course, host of the history podcast, When America Worked. Bill, always great having you on.
My pleasure. Talk to you soon.
The David Pakman Show depends on the support of our viewers and listeners, and one way to keep us going is through Patreon, where you can pledge as little as $1 per month or as much as you want at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Great perks and benefits as well. Read about them. All right, I've got a message for everybody today. Listen very carefully here. I don't want to be misunderstood. I don't care if you want to wear a mask forever. And what I mean by that is I don't mind. It doesn't bother me. It's no skin off my back. It really doesn't bother me at all. I'm not going to think twice if you want to wear a mask forever or for years or indoors or outdoors or whatever. I have no interest whatsoever in telling anybody not to wear a mask or worrying about people who plan to wear masks even beyond when the CDC recommends it. But there are increasingly more and more Republicans who are going off the wall with rage and fury that other people want to keep wearing masks. Now, this is actually a really big topic because fundamentally, this relates to the psychology of the pandemic, pandemic-induced PTSD, agoraphobia, fear, adjustment, and a whole bunch of different things that I'm glad to talk about in a moment. But fundamentally, this reaction from the right is the absurd hypocrisy of people who constantly claim, for decades, they've been claiming we're about liberty, individual freedoms, letting people do whatever they want as long as it doesn't infringe on someone else's freedom to do what they want. They are all about letting others do whatever the hell they want to do. And they will not stop talking about others who want to keep wearing masks of no consequence whatsoever to Tucker Carlson or to whoever doesn't want to wear a mask. Let's look at some examples. Here is a recent headline from a Fox News Tucker Carlson interview with Brit Hume called, quote, "Some people want to wear their masks forever." It was a segment dedicated to ridiculing and criticizing people who may be vaccinated but want to continue wearing a mask. Here is a segment from Fox News where reporter Peter Doocy either feigns confusion or is really confused about why Joe Biden wore a mask inside a Ford auto plant earlier this week, despite being vaccinated and despite the CDC guidelines now saying, vaccinated people really don't have to wear masks in most situations, including indoors. Let's take a look at this segment.
But the president is saying a lot by showing us what he's wearing. We have some new video you can see at an electric vehicle plant in Dearborn, Michigan. He has got a face mask covering his mouth and nose, which conflicts with the CDC guidance that you don't have to do that or socially distance indoors or outdoors as long as you are vaccinated, which the president has been since before taking the oath of office.
Now, when it comes to that specific event with Joe Biden at the Ford plant, and I believe it was Michigan, remember that the CDC guidelines are not state policy. And the CDC guidelines have not yet been made state policy in many places. And state policy and state law supersede recommendations from the CDC. At the end of the day, they're just recommendations. And of course, Ford, it's not just Michigan, Ford may well still have a policy that everybody's masking indoors, regardless of vaccination status. Many retailers still do, etc. But fundamentally, putting that aside, who cares if other people want to wear masks? As I've said before, I don't believe the outdoor masks were ever really necessary in almost any situation. But I did it in order to be a team player because those were the CDC guidelines and or state guidelines. And as soon as the CDC said masks are no longer recommended outdoors for vaccinated people, I haven't worn my mask outdoors since, other than in specific situations like waiting in line to get into a grocery store where the grocery store recommends it. Now that the CDC has said basically every activity for vaccinated people is low risk, I'm seeing other vaccinated people. And the truth is, everybody I know is vaccinated at this point, but I'm seeing vaccinated people indoors. We're not wearing masks. I've even sat inside of some cafes. But when I see people outside wearing a mask, I don't care. I don't give it 2 seconds of thought. If I devote some thought to it, I might wonder, well, maybe they're not yet vaccinated. Okay, so they're wearing a mask. Maybe they have a particular situation medically where they are at risk. Or maybe they just like covering their face, or maybe they're afraid because it's been 14 months of this and it takes time for people to readjust or whatever. Who cares? Just because it's not the CDC recommendation and just because I'm not doing it, what do I care if other people are doing it, as long as they're not berating me to do something that is not part of the CDC recommendation? So this is yet another one of those instances in which the hypocritical right-wingers claim to have certain values, but they don't stand by them when the rubber meets the road. Now, the other reality we also should mention is that any guidelines where there is a degree of nuance, where you need more than one sentence, it's probably too complicated for the people that watch Fox News. So it wouldn't be surprising to me if the reason, imagine that we looked and like maybe Michigan has pulled the mask mandate and maybe Ford did too. I don't know. It looks like everybody was wearing a mask there, so Ford probably requires it. But imagine that Ford said you don't have to wear masks if you're vaccinated. Michigan said the same thing. If Fox News viewers turn on the TV and absent any context, they just see Joe Biden walking around with no mask, many of them are going to immediately take their masks off in all situations, even around vaccinated people, because they don't understand what the hell is going on. So in some sense, you could make the case it makes a lot of sense for the president of the US to keep wearing the mask when he's going to appear on TV and in public, so that unvaccinated Fox viewers don't see it and assume they're clear to just do whatever the hell they want, despite not being vaccinated and despite being indoors around other unvaccinated people. So first of all, I don't care what other people are doing with their masks. Power to them to do whatever they want. But at the same time, because we have so many ignorant people in the United States, in a way, it kind of makes sense that this is exactly what Joe Biden would be doing. So come on, guys, just live your life. Get yourself vaccinated. Follow the CDC guidelines. Don't worry about what other people are doing. Let them do whatever they want. This is super interesting. When the COVID relief bill passed with Joe Biden president, the $1.9 trillion, where we had $1,400 checks go out to people, you, of course, I'm sure remember that not a single Republican elected official voted for it. I'm not saying almost no Republicans voted for it. Zero Republican senators voted for it. Zero Republican members of the House voted for it. People got COVID cash. Republicans, Democrats, independents, apolitical people. People got COVID cash only because of Democrats voting for it. Not a single Republican voted for it. And we said at the time, is this going to really lead to consequences for Republicans? Because there are many Republicans who will get their $1,400 and never find out that no Republicans voted for it. There are many of these Republicans who will get their $1,400 and say, well, I want the $1,400. I like the $1,400. I know my Republican officials didn't vote for it, but I don't care because I still got it anyway, and I'm not going to hold them accountable. So we had a sense that you were not going to see punishment for Republicans for voting against very popular COVID stimulus checks that went out. We now have a new poll which finds that 50% of rural voters don't realize that it is only thanks to Democrats that they received those $1,400 checks. Americans have so far received 3 direct payments from the federal government during the pandemic. 2 were under Donald Trump. 1 was under Democrats. The first 2 under Trump's administration had huge Democratic support. And it was thanks to Republicans and Democrats that people got those first 2 bills. But the third one under Joe Biden's watch was only because of Democrats. Rural Objective PAC. This is a super PAC that is working to build Democratic support in rural, as some say, areas, found that 50% of voters in rural areas associated the recent COVID stimulus checks with the Democratic Party. 32% believe they got those checks thanks to Republicans, and 11% believe that it was not a partisan thing one way or the other. 7% weren't sure. So this is a problem for Democrats for several reasons. Number one, Democrats are failing to connect with rural voters since half of them have no idea that it is because of Democrats and Democrats alone that they got those $1,400. And then the second problem is it seems as though Republicans are mostly going to get away scot-free with no or almost zero consequences for opposing the COVID stimulus, which was very, very popular. If you're looking for some good news, those same rural voters were asked that enhanced and extended unemployment. Who do you have to thank for that? Most of them knew that that did have to do with Democrats. Now, what's weird is it's all in the same bill. I don't know. This is the type of stuff that people like Rachel Bidikofer and others study and maybe could explain it to us. But this does not bode particularly well for Democrats in a number of different ways. And these are really not matters of opinion. I mean, there is a group in this country that just has no idea what's going on around them. There's no other way to say it. These are not matters of opinion. There are, we've talked before, there are people who like the Affordable Care Act but hate Obamacare. And there are people who are skeptical of Obamacare but would be okay expanding the Affordable Care Act. And of course, it's the same thing. They don't know it's the same thing. This is not we are not talking about an opinion about things. We are talking about facts and a large swath of the population that is clueless to the facts. Now, some of them are uninformed. As the poll said, 11% think that the COVID stimulus had nothing to do with Republicans or Democrats. 7% just weren't sure. So some people are really uninformed. Some people are misinformed. They believe something that is absolutely not true because it's been fed to them in some way, shape, or form. They've been fed the same lies for decades. They fall for all of them. It's not surprising. And they can't tell whether something is fact or fiction. And often they can't tell whether a statement is a statement of fact or a statement of opinion. Fox News is misinforming them. Republicans are misinforming them. Trump misinformed them. Sinclair-owned TV stations are misinforming them, and they don't know any better. There's not really any clear way to get them out of the right-wing bubble. They watch right-wing TV, they listen to right-wing radio, they go on Facebook and see things shared by people who have the exact same beliefs. They go to their church and often get a lot of the same stuff. They have no idea what is going on. And so the question we're continuing to grapple with, to which I don't have an answer, I wish I did, but I don't have an answer. How do you deprogram 75 million Trumpists? How do you do it? And we've talked before about the retail strategy, which is you on a one-on-one basis develop a relationship with people over time and slowly change their views. It can take weeks or months. The retail strategy, unfortunately, is not likely to be the mass deprogramming that we need. What would be a wholesale strategy that would work? I don't know. I don't even know how to break these people out of their echo chamber filter bubble. So we continue to search for answers to that is where we'll leave it today. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. I would love to hear from you. If you have any message for me, hopefully a polite one, you can leave it at 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a great question about something we've touched on a little bit before, but it's particularly relevant now in the conversations about the January 6th riots. Why are some in the media referring to these right-wing terrorists as militia members? Take a listen.
Yes. I'm just wondering why the media continues to call these right-wing terrorist groups militia. They are actually vigilantes.
Right.
Most media people are really always very critical about how they use words. Vigilantes are people who take the law into their own hands, and that's what they're not militia. And they want to call themselves militia just to sound more legitimate. So,
of course, this has been something we've talked about for a long time. Many of these groups, these sovereign citizen groups and these anti-government groups and those who come out to oppose Antifa, sometimes with violence or whatever the case may be. And by the way, that's not me endorsing violence from anybody, to be very clear. They want to be called militia. Militia sounds sort of like an unofficial military battalion or platoon or whatever the case may be. You're talking about vigilantes who are taking the law into their own hands in violation of the law. You're talking in many cases when they actually go out and commit acts of whatever. We're talking about terrorism here. And I think the media, corporate media, would be much more accurate if they were using that term rather than militia. At minimum, say self-described militia which is not actually a real thing in terms of legally binding or conferring any kind of rights or privileges to be vigilantes. This is something that they've dubbed themselves. It's extrajudicial. It's not recognized by the law in any way, shape, or form. It would be great if that was made more clear on a regular basis. Very astutely pointing that out in the voicemail. Call if you have a message for me. 219-2-DAVID P. On the bonus show today, the Colonial Pipeline CEO now admits to authorizing a greater than $4 million ransomware payment to get the pipeline flowing again. Incredible. Chicago Mayor Lightfoot says she will only be giving one-on-one interviews, to journalists of color. We will weigh in on that. And the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, has now signed into law one of the most restrictive abortion bills in the country, which would ban abortion as early as 6 weeks. We will talk about whether that will hold legally and much, much more on today's bonus show. Please get access to the bonus show. This is my please clap moment. Please get access. Sign up at joinpakman.com. Make a pledge at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. And then you will be brought right into the world of the award-winning, world-famous bonus show. I will be joined by producer Pat, and I will see you then. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman.